Welcome, everybody, to the Global Ag Tech Alliance's Prospectives webinar. I'm Heather Tunstall. I'm the co-chair of the Global Ag Tech Initiative. Today, we're going to be talking about the value of sharing data throughout the ag ecosystem with Ben Sloan and Alan Brady of Ever.Ag. Before we get started, I want to tell some people who may not know about the Global Ag Tech Alliance. It's a partnership with industry-leading technology and agricultural organizations, supporting the activities, the research, and the outreach that facilitate the adoption of ag tech. The Alliance is part of the broader Global Ag Tech Initiative, which unites a community of individuals and organizations dedicated to advancing technology solutions to create a sustainable and socially responsible world food production and distribution. We do this through a variety of content across our Meister Media worldwide brands, platforms, and events, as well as through globalagtechinitiative.com and our groundbreaking podcast series. This webinar series, Prospectives, is 4 times per year, in which we interviews our Global Ag Tech Alliance members on key topics facing the industry. So today, we're going to be talking with Ben Sloan and Alan Brady of Ever.Ag, who is one of our Alliance members. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Before we get started, real quick, some logistics for our attendees here. At the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A option. If you have questions throughout this webinar, please do drop them in that Q&A section. At the end of the webinar, we'll spend some time going through questions in the order that they're received. If we do not get to your question, don't worry about that. We will have a recap article on globalagtechinitiative.com. We'll send those questions to our panelists to answer and include that within that article there. And then if you do have, there's a chat feature down there as well. You can chat with individuals or you can chat with the broader group. Ben, Alan, thank you for joining us. You want to tell us a little bit about Ever.Ag and your role within the company?
You want to go first, Alan?
Sure. So maybe, Ben, if you're okay, maybe I'll start off. I'll talk a bit about Ever.Ag, and then I'll my role and talk a bit about that you introduce yourself as well. So what is Ever.Ag? Our tagline for the industry is everything agriculture. So we are a solution and a service company that provide kind of solutions and services across the entire ag supply chain. So think of everything between agribusiness, dairy, crops, animal protein. We have solutions and services that we'll send to the market to kind of help out on the technology side. And really, as we talk more about data, to also give some extreme insights into data as well. So myself, what I do at Ever.Ag, I actually lead the business management area underneath agribusiness, which that is for all of our ag-based ERP systems. So we have some retail accounting systems that we offer to a lot of our partners that allow them to kind of handle every single aspect of their business from start to finish. So whether that's true accounting or handling any of the complexities of ag, like feed and fertilizer and grain and energy, all these different things, we have platforms and solutions that a retailer can use to handle their day-to-day operations. So I oversee that team that does all of those good things. So then, Ben, maybe over to you.
Yeah, so hello, everyone. I'm Ben Sloan. I'm our VP of Product and Strategy within the Agribusiness Division. So that's really encompassing a lot of the agronomic software products that we produce, including products like Photolytics, AdaptN, and Roger, 2 new additions we made to our team, along with Agency Root as well, which are solutions for crop insurance agents. So with that, and I think both Alan and I's history, we've been dancing around this space for about a decade at this point in some form of our current roles. So I think we've seen, also how the sausage is made, if you will, and we've been able to evolve that into, solutions, as Alan mentioned earlier, for the broader agribusiness ecosystem.
Great. Thank you both so much for joining us today. So again, the topic is the value of sharing data throughout the ag ecosystem. What I want to do first is kind of set the stage a little bit, get some context around this topic, and talk about the why, right? So why are we even discussing this? I think it's important to understand first and foremost, where are we today with farmers or growers understanding and participating in data collection? What percentage would you say approximately are actively collecting and using data in the field as part of their business operations?
I can start on that one. So, and I think a good source to provide perspective is the USDA technology surveys. I always use that as a great barometer to understand, where we are along the, adoption curve. And so if you look at, I think yield monitoring is a great example to start with. We still, I think we're well under 75% of growers deploying yield monitors on their fields for corn and soybean harvesting. So I think we still have an opportunity to continue to move forward there, but also I think there's a key point that we look at with growers specifically is at some level, I feel like they almost get a bad rap from a data collection or technology standpoint. And I challenge that with people because, if you've ever tried to set up an in-command monitor yourself or something else, these are incredibly complex pieces of technology that our growers are working with. But I think a challenge that they faced is, yeah, there's so much data being generated today, and that's great, but what's the value in it for me? And until I see value from my hat of being the grower or my hat of being the retailer, why do I want to invest all this time in that data collection or the quality of data that we're focused on? But I think as and we'll get to it in some of our other topics we're going to cover today, but we have some items pivoting in the market that is bringing more value to those data sets that we subsequently, haven't really cared about. But it's on a journey and we continue to grow on that journey. But I really believe we're going to have some forcing factors coming up in the near future that are going to accelerate our methods or quantity of data collection. What are your thoughts, Alan?
No, I agree with you completely. I agree with your sentiment as far as 75%. I think that they're in ag, and I'm coming from the retailer lens, which if I say I'm coming from the retailer lens, I'm really coming from the farmer or grower lens, because all the data that the retailer is collecting is typically about a farmer or a grower. But I think there's a massive amount of data out there that's being collected. I will say, Ben, definitely the usage of the data or understanding the importance of the data, that's maybe where we're a little bit behind on the bell curve. But I will say, as time is progressing, we're seeing lots of partners and lots of technology companies and lots of solutions that are coming out where they're trying to come out with different pieces of software to say, this is the value you can get from your data. This is why you should be collecting it. This is why you should be doing something with it. So I definitely think there's a ton of data out there, but we're probably on the low end of the curve as far as adopting it and using it properly. Because I will say, from my experience, I don't know if a lot of retailers and growers and farmers understand the value of the data that they're giving or the value of the data that they're collecting. And I think that's where we're going to see huge adoption in the coming times.
Yeah, yeah. So we're talking a lot about that challenge of not understanding, the value of it. But another challenge we've also talked about quite a bit and seen and heard at the events that we go to is people are a little uncomfortable with the concept of sharing their data, right? So we've heard this quite often, but why should they consider sharing their data and having that data transparency?
Yeah, I think before we jump into that question, Alan, I really wanted to toss to you to get your perspective on data protections.
Sure.
As an item to get out of the way before we can really get into the value of, removing that uncomfortableness that may be out there.
Sure. So from a data protection standpoint, I think from our seat as a technology provider, we go on record saying that this data is owned and it is in control by the retailer in my particular case. So it is their data.
Mm-hmm.
Their data, they can do truly what they want with it. And when we say data, because I saw a great question that came in, and we got to make sure we get specific on this concept of data. So from a data standpoint, we're talking about a little bit of everything. When I say data, I'm coming from a business aspect. So I'm talking about inventory data, customer data, financial data, things of that nature related to the business aspect of what the retailer is doing. But all that data inherently is theirs. I think as a technology provider, what we bring to the table is we provide services and software that can give you insights into that data and can let you see it in different ways and give you information and analytics on what you can do and how you can move and actually have great actions or on top of the data. So from a data perspective, I think we need to deal with that, Ben, to your point, saying that the data is owned by the retailer. And then in the case, if there were any applications that the farmer or grower was using, the data is owned by the farmer. So you have to deal with that. And from a data privacy standpoint, I will say, I think the light bulb is coming on for a lot of retailers where they're starting to see the importance of it. And they're starting to question, well, why should I be sharing it and why should I be giving it away? Because the data has value. The data definitely has value. I mean, I think we'll get to that maybe a little bit later on as we discuss. But Ben, does that make sense? Would you
Yeah,
agree?
I agree. And I think to even get into the further details on that, as we look at from our seat, right, as software providers, and we look at, areas of integration or opportunity that our customers are pursuing, to Alan's earlier point, we, the piece I would really encourage is make sure that before you enter in a relationship with any new organization that can bring value, make sure that that data piece is clear and well defined in your agreements. Because we got to be so careful of this, because we are stewards of that data, to echo Alan's point, on behalf of our customers, and we want to make sure that the data continues to be protected, both from a legal basis and also from a technical basis as well. What are the areas that we're focused on? I mean, ransomware continues to be my biggest concern as we think about someone clicking on an email and getting access to, your company's organization. We've seen examples in retail over the last few years of that, and it's scary. And so the other questions that I want folks to be asking, and we're getting back to the point around uncomfortability of sharing the data, but we need to have these two foundational aspects well defined and understood by our customers. One, from, again, the legal aspect, making sure that there are rules and restrictions around how data can be used based with your partner companies, but also from a security standpoint, if we're bringing this data to another organization and something terrible happens, either within your organization or within our organization potentially, making sure that your provider and your partners in this space have protections in place that stops any leakage of that type of information. But going back to really, Heather, your core question, the uncomfortableness of sharing data, pardon me, I think there are components of that have been resolved. Like I see good aspects of that we've seen through partner networks with, let's say yield data from our climate or John Deere or Agfinity or Case or any of these. We've really gotten to a comfort level with those, where we know where this is going, we know what this data is, and also the retailer or our customer, the ag service provider, is having that discussion with the grower of, hey, this is how I'm using the data to make these decisions. This is the value of why you want to share this with me. And I think as long as we can communicate that value, that removes the concerns that I feel like a lot of people are seeing on the data sharing piece. Because some of this stuff is very sensitive, both to your point, Alan, the ag retailer business, but also to the grower's farm operation. And so again, I think the key point is, if we have those two foundational items out of the way, the legal and the technical security items as part of a provider, making sure then that our customer's customer, the grower, has confidence in there's a reason why my partner wants this data, and this is the value I'm going to get from delivering that data to them.
That's a great point, Ben. That's a great point, because I think if I'm a Apple fan, I'm an iPhone user. So if I compare kind of what we do a bit to Apple or to iPhones, in some of the recent iOS updates, you'll probably notice, if you use an iPhone, that when you go into a lot of these apps, the first question you get is, can I track your activity? Yes or no? Do I allow the tracking of your activity? Do I not allow the tracking of your activity? And I think Apple and ag in general, we would have to make sure we take steps to really hone in data transparency, which is what you were mentioning, Ben.
Yep.
I think if we can do a good job as technology providers, and if retailers can do a good job with farmers, if you can provide that transparency and explain to the individual why you're tracking the data and what's the value you can get out of it, I think that'll definitely take you far. I think that'll remove some of the uncomfort between me getting access to your data and then using your data on your behalf.
Yeah. And Alan, you just kind of nailed that why question. What do you need the data for, right? So
Yeah.
let's talk about that. Let's bring that out to the forefront here. What are some of the factors that are contributing to, like, the need for data collection? What's the need there?
Sure. So maybe if I kick us off, Ben, and then maybe you can go as well. So if I think about it from the operational aspect or the business aspect, a lot of time this data is needed for, use a buzzword, data interoperability between software packages. So for example, we think about how we may transact or purchase product from manufacturers. Well, we got to have a common set of data that we can share between the two, as far as item attributes and inventory information. We have to be able to pass that information between the two, or between our platform and maybe a manufacturer's platform. So I think that's one example of a reason why you may want to share data between the two, just to make that process seamless. And I think the key is when it comes to data sharing, there should be a benefit. So when we're sharing data with different partners, typically there's some type of benefit around efficiency. We're saying we're going to share this data between our platform and this other platform, so that way you as a retailer, you don't have to go do XYZ. You don't have to do duplicate entry, or you don't have to go look at it in two places. We're trying to give you some value there to explain why data is moving from one to the other. So I would say that would be one example from my seat that I typically see, is that we're trying to share that data to make the retailer's life a bit easier.
And so I think there's a, Alan, I really appreciate that. And I think there's a, let's call it a hotter opportunity or item in the space. And from my perspective, it all goes back to traceability. And traceability, right? Going back to how did we produce the crop to then deliver, to whoever the end specifier is, whether that's, I'm growing potatoes for, McCain as an example, or I'm, delivering a lot of commoditized grain to, one of the larger grain originators in the United States. Independent of that, we continue to move down the road and I'll insert carbon, sustainability, what have you. There are a lot of new questions being asked that are bringing value to data sets that we honestly haven't cared about in the past. And again, to give everyone's perspective, I'm very much thinking about this from the spatial side. So a lot of the as applied, as planted, as yield data sets, or potentially the work order application data that our ag service providers are doing on behalf of their customers. Previously, right, a lot of those items were either needed for compliance, potentially, right, if I have a spray claim or something around in that lens, or potentially, right, I'm leveraging the data maybe for yield data for removal when I'm making a prescription or I'm making some type of management zone decision or something around that. But the interesting piece, to reference back to my earlier point, that I feel like is going to be driving an increase in data movement throughout the ag ecosystem, but also bringing value to those data sets being moved throughout the ag ecosystem, is this broader goal of traceability that I think we're all working toward. And it's a very painful set of steps for us to get there, candidly, because we've been doing this for, Alan and I myself, both about a decade now. And we're a heck of a lot better than where we were 10 years ago, but we're absolutely still not there. But again, going back to this traceability and the transparency of traceability, I think about a lot of our customers in the Wisconsin area that are facilitating gap audits, essentially, of how is this potato crop produced. The level of detail that's needed to, deliver to your specifier there for that potato crop is vastly different, right, than what's needed to deliver, bulk grain or bulk corn, to the barge or to the rail car or wherever have you. But this sustainability and traceability piece really goes back to and drives new opportunities for that. And an example that I would bring forward is tillage is a great example. As as a software provider of retailers, I historically have never cared about tillage data, right? Because the retailer's not advising on tillage decisions, as an example. But now all of a sudden, there's value in collecting that tillage data so that we, can deliver on, here's every activity that went on the field this season. Here's every product, here's every pass we did. Because every time wheels touch the field, we're impacting the land. How can we organize all that data together so that it's streamlined for our customers, the ag service providers, to then deliver on those subsequent data needs for their growers? And that, to me, really opens up this new opportunity, and it really brings value to, a heck of a lot of data that we've been collecting over the years. We never actually look at it, or we never actually do anything with it. So why the heck are we sharing it? And now we're pivoting to this world where all of those data sets that we didn't really think had value previously now begin to have value in the broader ag tech ecosystem. And then really, to echo Alan's point, integrations and efficiencies are key pieces that drive the opportunity of these data sharing. So I do think about duplicate data entry, or I think about, for a lot of our customers that work with these sustainability tools, collecting all of these data sets at the end of the season in an Excel spreadsheet, and we're putting one more task on the sales agronomist that barely has time, in fall or spring to do this type of data collection. And so if we can streamline that, then we can remove that burden and get them back to their core business of, servicing their growers on behalf of that retail customer.
Something I think they could probably appreciate, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
That's great. And you've touched on some of this already, but this gets to Dennis asked a question in the chat here, talking about what kind of data. So we're talking about a variety of different kinds of data and how we can use them and the value that it offers. But specifically, what should be collected? What's the value? What's the most valuable kinds of data that you collect and use?
And I think the key piece to that question is, from what perspective are you looking, or what type of decision you're looking to make?
Mhm.
So if we talk about it right from a a core precision agronomy standpoint, there's our classic data sets that we worked with for a number of years. That could be our soil samples, that could be our yield data, that could be NDVI imagery that we're consuming through the season. Maybe you care about the slope of the field and you want a LiDAR layer to make a decision on that. Then we could jump forward a little bit and think about a lot of the data where, Alan, and this is where I'll pass off to you, a lot of those records of custom application that we see so many of our ag service provider customers do. Those are key important data sets of from a compliance standpoint, but also from a billing standpoint of did I spray the right products on the field? If there is a claim, do I have chain of custody of everything that happened on that sprayer? Did we do the washout effectively if we're switching between products? Did we apply at the correct rates to maintain our compliance items? And then, Alan, I really pass it to you to think about some of those decisions that the retailer's making with their business management data.
Definitely, because I think from a data standpoint, all the data you're collecting on the operational side or financial side would be more related to profitability or inventory optimization, things of that nature. So all this different bits of data that are occurring, or all these bits of data that you're entering and information that's being gathered, well, what can you do with it? Can you actually go and see how profitable, Ben, if we go back to you with spatial, how profitable a field is based on what you've been charging and the cost of operation and what inventory is going out to that field? Can you use that same data for you to forecast and figure out what you need to sell and maybe what opportunities you have out there, meaning you've sold one thing to a grower, but not another thing to a grower? I think all those different data sets, you can use all that information really to give you or to help you make, I would say, clear business decisions. So whether that's any data related to a record that was entered in, any type of application that occurred on a field from the agronomy side, or any type of interaction that you had with a grower, you can take those data sets, you can mine those data sets and get analytics off of them.
And I think that's a key point, right? As we talk about what we're passing off between each other, both from our products together today, but also other partners we see in the industry. And I think the phrase that you just mentioned of, right, it's helping make that business decision is key in what those data sets that we need to consider, right? Because again, going back to my comment earlier around perspectives, right? The precision agronomist has a very different perspective on data sets than, to your point, Alan, right? The procurement person at the ag retailer. It potentially are the same data sets, but we're just looking at them through two different lenses to make those subsequent decisions.
That's right. That's right.
It's a great point. And let's dig a little bit more into that. And when we're talking about the business sense of sharing your data and collecting data and what it's used for, you get into things like rebate management, right? And insurance and things like that. Can you give an example of some real world applications that people can benefit from sharing their data?
Definitely. So maybe I'll hit rebate management, Ben, and maybe you want to hit insurance. So let's talk rebate management. Typically with these rebates, you have to supply to you have to give to the supplier or the manufacturer all the sales that occurred. So along with that sale, you have to make sure you specify the correct inventory item, the quantity that was sold in the right package size, also dictating what customer it was sold to. So you've got all this information about that one transaction that you need to accurately get to the manufacturer, so that way you as a retailer, or in some cases a grower, can get paid a rebate. So data shared for all of your sales information, everything about that sale, who that sale went to. Data is also shared about your purchasing information, because for a lot of these rebates, it's based on what you buy from the manufacturer and then turn around and sell to the end grower. So those are great practical examples of integrations we have with outside partners or outside partners, where we take all this data that was keyed in, all those records that were captured, and then we send those over. We ship the information over to the manufacturer, so that way the retailer doesn't have to key anything in related to rebate management.
And if I can take the lens from the insurance piece, and I think actually, Dennis, I can hit on the question that you asked in the chat here of, how are we approaching this as we work? Potentially streamlining some of the reporting needs that we have to do with the government. So I think before I get to that, taking a step first from a data standpoint, first of all, as we look at insurance, one of the pieces I've gotten in the space is precision data is hard to work with, but the value of that data, Dennis, to the question that you were asking, really drives potential opportunities for efficiency. Like I've done FSA reporting before. It can be a pretty tedious task with your planting report. You're sitting in the FSA office, you're highlighting fields with a highlighter. You're honestly, you're probably sitting there for a couple hours going through your various counties and your various cropping practices that you're using to submit your information for crop insurance. And so that's an example where we looked at a partner saying, hey, from wearing my field analytics hat, don't know a lot about the insurance reporting needs that are needed by growers to facilitate crop insurance. I don't know. I have a lot of those data sets that can help streamline that process, and that's where we looked at other partners in the space. And so we worked with MyAg Data as an example. They've brought forward acreage reporting programmatically via the API and worked with the government over a number of years to facilitate the e-filing of those pieces of information. And now that's looking back at us and saying, okay, great, we have these data sets that can help augment and make that decision or make that filing of that information a heck of a lot faster. And so that's an area where both we see, okay, there's now value to these data sets that we were already collecting through a new lens. And we also need a partner to work with that helps really understand that specific space very tightly. And let's make an integration there so that we can streamline the filing of that information. So that would be one example. And then I continue to go back to a lot of the carbon and the sustainability pieces because it's a very hot topic, right? And I also feel like we can get down the road a little bit on the AI and machine learning and those data sets as well. But if we just go back to the sustainability piece, and again, that couples with traceability, I think about all of these data sets that we're now collecting, that the entire swath of every time we're on a field, those data sets now have value and are needed in subsequent reporting. And then again, to hit on the theme of integration, it really matters that I have the product information that my ERP integration partner like Alan has, because I need to know the nutrient analysis on the various crop protection or sort of crop nutrient products that were applied to the field, so we have an understanding of, hey, here's how much N went down on the field, here's how much P went down on the field this season, because that has immense value in those subsequent reporting needs that our customers are beginning to engage with.
And Ben, one thing maybe we should speak to, because I'm sure this is going to come up. What's your thoughts on standards? Because that's one question. We talk about data sharing, but
yeah,
what do you think on standards? Because I'm curious about your thoughts.
Standards will continue to be a struggle right now. There has been good work done in the standard space. I think about work that we've done with Modus from a soil sampling perspective, or I think about it from the adapt spec with yield and as applied and as plants data, or I think about all my blender integration partners of the mixed ticket work where we came to a standard definition of, hey, here's how we communicate this information to a blender. We will continue to have challenges now in that space because there are, N number of players that want to consume data from people like Alan and I, but may not be wanting to implement certain specs or standards as part of that. And I think it comes back to us to make sure that we're forcing or implementing the standards that we know are already existing onto other partners, because selfishly, that helps us a good bit, because it reduces the risk of one-off integrations then for us become death by 1,000 cuts.
Yes.
And if we have standards, that removes that at least that piece of a failure mechanism. Because right, it's software. Software is always going to break. Software is always going to have bugs. But if we can reduce the footprint that we have in formatting those data sets to communicate to other partners, that is inherently less risk on everyone that's making those connections in the organization. But we're still not there with standards. There's so many other data sets that we work with where we haven't gotten to develop those standards yet.
Yeah.
And Ag Gateway will continue to help us push those standards forward. But then also in the interim, as we spend time developing those standards, we just have to work with other partners to at least internally come together on what our definitions are of data standards. And I got asked this at Vision when I spoke on the stage about data. I think it was 3 years ago at this point. And the person was, why isn't there some, broader, data warehouse or data sharing piece? And maybe it will be in the future. I think we've seen attempts at it, but the struggle has been we haven't seen the value of us centralizing those data sets outside of our own ecosystem. So then at the end of the day, it just comes back to, well, we just need to make a connection to our partner so our customer, the ag service provider, can gain efficiency in their business. And that's the problem I want to solve today, not the broader data sharing piece of some other third party.
And Ben, I'm glad you mentioned Ag Gateway, because Ag Gateway, it's a great example. Organization is trying to set data standards, but I will say one thing that probably we need as a technology provider, the help we need is from the end retailer or service provider. We need them to be a part of those organizations as well to kind of help push those forward, and then also ensure that we're doing the right things. Because I think from a software standpoint and a technology standpoint, we have all these great ideas and things that we want to do, but we got to make sure we can implement them, and then we got to make sure we show value to our end customer, which is the retailer. But yeah, that's a great point with Ag Gateway and standards, and just standards in general.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that question, Alan, because that is something that comes up so often, and the need for standardization in certain cases there. And you also touched on something else that I want to dig into. There are several different roles here, right? There's the role of the grower themselves, the retailers, and then the tech providers. So when it comes to data collection and sharing across the full ag ecosystem, what does that mean across those roles? So for the grower, what does it mean for them? For the retailer, what does it mean for them? And for the broader tech community, what does it mean to them to share data across the entire ecosystem?
So I think from a grower perspective, I guess the value or the need or the reason why or what it means to them, it really then helps their partner service providers, and that could be the ag retailer, that could be your crop insurance agent, that could be your banker who you're getting your operating note from. There are so many people that touch the grower in their business of producing a crop and bringing it to market. And so, I guess as we look back at all those, potentially there are similar data sets they're all working with, but it brings an opportunity to streamline some of their processes so they can be, that service provider can become more efficient in serve that grower more effectively, but also serve their broader business more effectively through the efficiencies that these integrations can bring or do here. And that to me is the key point of, whether it's an agronomic decision of, hey, I want to use my yield map for removal as I'm making a recommendation. That of course brings value to the grower, because now we're making potentially a variable rate recommendation based on all the data sets that we know in the field, and we're putting what we believe to be is the right product in the right place at the right time. Maybe it goes back to the 4 hours that a lot of our agronomists are under. But the other ones, I think of a great example of the value of data sharing. If we look at all the complexity of soybean traits that we have in the market, and there are all of these different traded soybeans, and if me as the retailer don't have confidence in what the trait is on the field for the products that I'm then spraying, we could introduce a crop failure here and subsequently very expensive spray claims. Or I think about a good example, hey, this is the last field that grower planted for that season, and they're just throwing all the varieties they have remaining, in their shop in the field. So we potentially have multiple traits out in the field. And I saw examples of this last year, where, there were just stripes in the field that were dead from spraying because one of the traded soybeans in the field had a problem with one of the crop protection products applied that resulted in certain parts of the field being a crop failure. And that then resulted in subsequent claims. So I think about pieces not only of transparency in data specifically in that point, but also then making sure that both parties understand that transparency and that they both sign off and that they agree with what's out in the field, so that we can reduce those honestly types of very expensive mistakes or accidents that can happen just because we didn't have transparency in those data sets. So that really, from a grower perspective, those are some key pieces that I see immediate near-term value. I don't know, Alan, if you want to take me up the chain a little higher to what the retailer's potentially facing.
Yes, no, I think Ben, you hit the nail on the head. When I think about data sharing, you can kind of take it from maybe 2 different aspects. I definitely think a benefit of sharing data is definitely on the integration side to deal with tediousness. If I quote you, Dennis, I saw that in your question, things being tedious. You can definitely share data from an integration standpoint to deal with some of those tedious issues that you may have as far as duplicate entry or getting the data from one piece of software to another. I think that's one aspect of data sharing. I think another aspect of data sharing that's really beneficial for the retailer is definitely on the profitability side, because there are certain bits of data that you need to share in order for you to get a return on your investment. So we talked about rebate management. You need to share that data to ensure that you get the proper rebate as a retailer back from any manufacturers. Ben, you spoke a bit about sustainability and carbon. Well, in the future, from a sustainability standpoint, you will have to have a certain standard and a certain set of data that you need to share in order to get the benefits of that. So I think there's a profitability aspect of it and a monetization aspect of it that retailers need to realize that's the reason why you're sharing data. So I think it really falls into those two categories. You do it for efficiency gains, and you may do it from a profitability standpoint because there's a reason to share it because there's money in it for you.
Alan, and I think about a great example that we've had, or a big win I feel like we've had in the space over the last few years. And I think about it in regards to all of the blender partners that we both have in the space. Not only does it bring efficiency of being able to programmatically communicate, here's the information for this specific order that needs to be blended for a dispensement for that grower, but more importantly, our blender partners send the actual dispense quantities back. So that then helps us then update our ERP partners with understanding, okay, yes, here's what was ordered, here's what was actually dispensed, and making sure that the ERP is up to date. So one, we're billing the customer correctly for that, but also then the retailer has great insight into what their actual true inventory is, because we're not saying here's what was ordered, is actually, no, here's actually what left your shop or your fertilizer plant or something like that. And so that's a really tactical, tangible win that we're seeing in the market where, one, it did bring efficiency, but also then through the lens of better inventory management, because we have the right data, or we believe in the accuracy or the timeliness of the data, we can then make better procurement decisions down the road, which then inherently drives retailer ag service provider profitability.
Great. Okay, I want to bring this back to a comment. Ben, you mentioned about less than 75% of growers are utilizing data and data collection. What advice, if they get it, say they're listening in right now and they're hearing this and they're going, okay, yeah, I'm in, let's do it. What advice do you have for them to get started in the process of data collection and working with the industry to reap those benefits?
And Heather, I would pivot that a bit to really focus on the retailer or the ag service provider's set of conversations with that grower. Mainly because, we all can do a better job collecting data. I think about things that I do in my own life, maybe from my personal finances and the data that I collect there as part of that. And there may or may not be value to me in the quality of that data that's being collected. And I then pivot that to think about, okay, how is the grower understanding that I should be collecting this data and the value of this data collection and what's in it for me?
Yeah.
And it really goes back to our ag service provider customers making sure that, and we actually have a good number that have started doing this, really data management as a service for their customers. Because if they're upfront with that, there's a fee and cost to organizing this data, because a key piece to that is a grower doesn't have or own every data set that occurs on their field to produce that crop for this year. So it's going to be in collaboration with whomever their ag service providers are, whether that's the retailer, the insurance agent, the banker, like I mentioned, or if you're working with a sustainability organization. Doesn't matter, but we need to make sure that that grower has value, has clear understanding of that before they even get started. Because I would tell you, right, if you don't know why you're collecting the data, but you just think you should collect it, I would, take a step back and saying, like, do I want to invest in these pieces of technology that enable me to collect those data sets? Now, though, Heather, getting back to what the core of your question, I think part of it is identifying what are the decisions myself as a grower want to make with these data sets, and what are the outcomes that collecting this data and having quality data will enable me to drive. Maybe it's a better grain marketing decision, and that's why I want sets of yield monitors. Maybe it's I want to consider supporting moving toward like a multi-hybrid planner in my planning operation. So one, that's a massive capital investment for that grower to first consider, but hopefully then they're working again, going back to their ag service provider partner, that they're in collaboration on, hey, I have this new piece of technology, please help me get the most return on investment you can out of it. Otherwise, it's just a really expensive, pretty planner that we can, run through the field.
Alan, do you have anything to add?
No, Ben, well, yes, I guess, Ben, what you're hitting on is, I think the value in collecting this data, or the retailer or service provider collecting this data from the grower or the farmer, is really them moving into that trusted advisor role.
Yep.
I think that's what they have to explain, because one question that came up was, well, should the processor be paying for the grower's data? And then how do you put value on it? And I think that's where, as an industry, we have to kind of get some standards, and we have to decide what direction we want to go in. I would say today, I'm not sure if they should be paying for it, but I can say that if you're going to collect the data, you're going to collect farmers' data, you need to make sure you go back to them and you explain why. And then you can give them tangible benefits and tangible value adds, saying that because you let me get your yield data, or because you gave me this additional information, or because we did this farm plan together, because a farm plan is a great example. Because we did this farm plan together, I can give you XYZ benefit. I can be your trusted advisor. I can be your trusted partner, and I can help you get a return.
Oh, sorry, Alan, go for it.
I think if retailers do that, I think that'll definitely ease the conversation. And instead of us monetizing and you're paying the farmer or grower to get the data, instead you're saying, I'm going to give you value because you did share it with me.
And I think to build off of that question that we saw in the chat, Alan, that you started picking up, I think the answer, Tom, around who should pay for the data, or is there a payment for the data? I think depending on where you fit in the space, it's a different answer, and it could be a carrot or it could be a stick. And so, I think about specifiers or processors of certain types of crops, let's say crops where I can't sell that crop on the open market. So let's say it's potatoes or it's sugar beets or it's almonds out in California, items where when I plant the crop, I already have a good understanding, or I already know where that crop's going to end up. There is thus then a different relationship on the data collection, because the specifier controls the market for the delivery of that crop, so they get to dictate what the piece is, and it's not a conversation of, well, can you give me these other data sets and I'll pay you more money. It's, I'm not going to let you deliver the crop here unless you have these data sets. And I go back to my examples of growers that we help in Wisconsin facilitate their gap audit to deliver potatoes for certain potato processors. But the other piece, the bigger piece, right? I think about corn, soybeans, and wheat. And if, again, we're just thinking about, regular corn, not corn that were specific, maybe not non-GMO corn, or specific seed corn, or a specific variety of corn that we're growing for a specific downstream specifier. We're just talking about that broader corn piece. In my heart, I wish it would be that folks would pay for a better quality data set that's associated with that bushel. Because from my perspective, if I can prove how this bushel was produced independent of the practices that I used to produce the bushel, that bushel inherently has more value because I have that chain of custody and traceability on that bushel. But I don't see that directly in the market from those purchasers. I suspect it'll just slowly over time move more and more to a stick mentality, where these are just the expectations that are going to be placed on all of us to deliver that crop for sale. And I don't love that answer, but then I do see other opportunities to deliver those data sets. Again, and not to bang on the sustainability piece, but again, it's a popular topic, and it's a question that I know a lot of our customers are facing. That potentially is then the opportunity to leverage those same data sets that I already collected to then receive an additional payment or opportunity off of that.
But Ben, you would say, from a payment standpoint, I do think that there is a world, at least from the sustainability lens, where my crop is more profitable and it is more valuable because of the practices I did in my field. And while you're not necessarily paying them directly for their data, they are getting more value because of the practices and the proof that they have that my crop was XYZ.
Absolutely, because that starts to go back into the thousands of decisions as a grower I made in collaboration with my trusted advisor, the ag service provider. You know, having confidence in those data sets then lets us make other agronomic decisions in this season. I think about what we're doing with Adapt-N today. If I have confidence in where the crop's out, and then I can make a financial decision of, does it make sense to do that additional application of side dress of nitrogen in season, because I believe I can push my crop to then deliver additional returns off of it. And then also as a result, then another downstream discussion that happens from that is I want to work either myself, if I'm marketing the grain myself, or work with my grain marketing partner to say, hey, I believe I'm going to deliver X amount more bushels because I've done this side dress. How do I want to market that grain effectively so that I really can maximize the ROI on that agronomic decision that we made in the season?
Yeah.
So I think to sum up, Alan, that point is at the very end downstream of us delivering the crop, we may not get payment for that specific data set, but there are going to be benefits along the way where we're going to be able to derive value, whether that's a direct payment, right, like a carbon program or something, or it's I've now produced a crop more effectively or efficiently, and thus I can, market more grain efficiently.
Great. I'm going to let the attendees know if you've got questions, go ahead and drop them in that Q&A now. We're going to wrap up with the answer session. We've gone through some of them, but feel free to drop some in now. Before we get to those, though, Ben and Alan, we've talked a lot about the value of sharing data throughout the ag ecosystem. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you think is important for attendees to hear?
I think there's a key piece, and it goes back to that traceability piece of independent of what software providers or services that you're using, just making sure that one, your organization has a strategy on how you want to go pursue these types of data sets or data lakes or pools of data, whatever the buzzword is of, I need to aggregate a lot of data into a singular place. So going back to one, make sure that all of your partners that you're working with are aligned with your organization's vision of, hey, we need to centralize this. So then independent of what decision needs to be made in my organization, I have a singular place where I can look at my data. I have confidence, first of all, as well in the quality of that data, because that's a key piece that I think we forget. We can gather all the data we want, but if we don't believe in the quality of it, what was the point of collecting it, honestly? So Alan, I think about that's an opportunity where we can deliver a lot of insights on that broader picture of really that agronomic and the transactional data sets coming together to truly give that whole picture, both for the grower and for that organization.
Great. Thank you. Alan, anything that you would like to add that we haven't touched on?
No, I think, Ben, you summed it up nicely there. I was going to wrap up saying that, as a retailer or as a farmer or grower, just make sure you understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, which is exactly what you said, Ben. I think data is a big buzzword right now. And it's going to be a bigger buzzword as we go through time, because now we're starting to see the usage of data and why it's important and what benefit you can get from it. It's coming up more and more in conversations. So I think, to your point, Ben, just having a strategy. As a grower, you need to have a strategy, and as a retailer, you definitely need to have a strategy of why you're doing it, what you're doing with it, and then who do you want to give it to? Because data does have value. And I think in the ag industry, the value is tremendous, and it's going to increase over time, because we're going to see government regulation that's going to really help some of that or drive some of that need. And whether it's carrot or stick, to quote you, Ben, it's coming. So you just need to make sure you know why you're doing what you're doing from a data perspective.
And Heather, I saw a question from Dennis in the chat, and I love the reference. I remember, I think it was Aaron Hunt that said that around, right, we can crash a spaceship in an asteroid 7 million miles away, but it's trouble for a grower to record, what was planted in their field. And to me, that goes back to the value of what's in it for the grower to record that information. And so then I go back to my, soybean traits example of, I don't want my crop field, so thus I better have some skin in the game and make sure that my ag service provider is understanding of the various traits that I have in the field, so my field doesn't get killed. I think that's one small example, but until me as the ag service provider can deliver that value to the grower, that will continue to be a challenge. And that then goes back to our comments on these organizations need to have a strategy on how they want to go pursue this so they can then deliver and, more importantly, showcase that value to their customers.
Great. Okay. Oh, so chat shouldn't be disabled. Dennis, is it working? Yep, there we go. So there's a link that Dennis shared for the Purdue, and feel free to plug, go for it. Shameless plugs are welcome, for farmers taking ownership in their own data records. We do have another question from an attendee. What measures are in place to ensure the responsible and equitable sharing of agricultural data among stakeholders, including farmers, technology providers, researchers, and policymakers?
So I think that goes back to some of our opening comments, thinking about, there are n number of providers in the ag tech ecosystem space, plus even, n number plus one consumers of that data that are service providers of the grower in some way. And so I guess it really goes back to, first of all, before I as an organization enter into any relationship with any software provider or downstream consumer of that data, I have full understanding of how that data is going to be used subsequently and what protections I have in place. And then furthermore, it goes back to the ag service providers need to make sure that the partners that they're working with have the technical protections in place so that that data is secure, so that if, again, I guess to bring up the ransomware examples that we've seen hit ag retailers, we need to make sure that that data is protected in the organization so that it can't subsequently be leaked out by, some type of bad actor in the space. So those are the two key pieces that anyone needs to, make sure that they have understanding of before they sign any agreement with any partnership. Those have to be answered. Otherwise, I feel you're putting yourself at significant risk of leakage or inappropriate use or unclear use of data that you yourself as the ag service provider are stewards of on behalf of your grower.
Yep. Great. Alan, do you have anything to add to that?
No, Ben, it goes back to what we said before. You need to know what's in it for you and why you're doing it in the first place. And I just think as growers and as retailers go out and they get these different packages and they choose these different partners, those are great questions to ask up front. And I can say, even from our seat, as we sell our software and demo our software, whether it's Fidalytics or Merchant Ag, those questions come up. They come up from retailers and they ask us, well, what are you doing with the data and how's this going to work? And are you going to share it? And what are you sharing exactly? Those are all great questions that you should ask.
And to echo that, Alan, it should be an easy answer.
Yeah.
Right? It should be black and white. If it's not clear to you, you need to make it clear.
Great points. All right. I think we have gone through the questions. Obviously, if there's any others, please feel free to drop them in the last minute here. We'll make sure that we answer them during that wrap-up article that we'll post. Speaking of which, globalagtechinitiative.com will have this full session recorded. We'll have a link posted and have that article as well. We'll share that on LinkedIn. So if you don't follow us, Global Ag Tech Initiative is our profile name. Please feel free, and I imagine Ever.Ag will also probably share this as well, so follow them on LinkedIn as well. Ben and Alan, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise today. I think this was a really great chat. A lot of very good points going on about the value of the data and why it's important to share it across the ecosystem. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Heather.
Yes, thank you. Just great.
Thanks, everyone, for your time.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining. And again, globalagtechinitiative.com. Follow us on LinkedIn and we'll have more information up soon. Otherwise, this concludes our webinar. Have a great rest of your day.